Hi, Guy. There is something ancient in the quiet, a hush that reaches far beyond your room tonight, beyond the walls, beyond the hum of the modern world. It stretches across eons, through dust, through stone, through time that has no names. Soften your shoulders now, loosen your breath. Let go of the bright day behind you, and step gently with me into a world older than memory, where the fire is the only clock, and shadows on the cave wall are the closest thing to a story. Welcome back to Echo, and welcome to History for Sleep, where the past moves slowly, like drifting smoke, and tonight we listen for the footsteps of someone long forgotten. Tonight we follow a woman, a cave woman, as the world has come to call her, though she never called herself anything at all. No name remains carved in stone for her, no grave with letters, no portrait, and yet her life still left marks. Faint echoes, a worn path near the stream, a smooth patch on a rock where she once sat, grinding seeds, a tiny thumbprint hardened in clay, a curve of red pigment on a far cave wall. Tonight is not about kings, not about battles or empires or thrones. Tonight belongs to someone quieter, more familiar in her silence. She could have been your ancestor. Perhaps she was. Let's close our eyes for a moment. Imagine the world before streets, before schools, before recipes, before borders, before gods with names. A world without metal. A world where the stars above were the only map, and the trees whispered the only calendar. The air is thick with the scent of moss and earth. Somewhere in the canopy, a bird shrieks, not a songbird, but something older, sharper, almost reptilian. Beneath the stone outcrop, a small shelter of skins and branches is just beginning to stir. Inside, a woman stretches. She wakes not to alarms or agendas, but to the rhythm of breath and cold, to hunger and memory, to the rustle of children, the hum of insects, the weight of survival. She is not the weak, helpless figure that cartoons have mocked. She is strong, wiry, marked by weather and work. She is clever, not with words written in books, but with instincts honed over years of knowing which berry nourishes, and which one burns the tongue. She holds in her mind the paths of the animals, the shifts in the wind, the right stones to strike together to keep the fire alive. This is the story we never learned in school, because for so long, history was written by those who thought only of men, of weapons, of conquest. They left out the slow work of the hands, the grinding of grain, the tending of children, the stitching of furs, the healing of wounds, the carrying of life inside the womb and through the forest. But these were the rhythms that shaped our species. And she, this nameless woman beneath the cave's low roof, was part of every step forward humanity ever took. She was not a bystander. She was not a supporting role. She was the world's original center. We begin tonight by walking beside her, softly, so as not to wake the others. She gathers the tools she laid out the night before, a worn stone for grinding, a basket of woven grass to carry roots, a piece of flint for starting flame. All simple, all vital. The fire has burned low. Its coals pulse like sleeping embers of thought. She stirs them gently, breathes life back into flame. This, too, is a kind of memory, passed down not in words, but in motions, in muscle, in breath. A few children whimper. A man turns in his sleep, but she is already outside, her feet bare on the soft path, the ground still damp with the night's breath. The world around her is not quiet, not truly. There is the chatter of creatures, the sigh of wind, the distant crack of wood. But she moves through it with ease, as though part of the forest herself. And in a way, she is. She knows which plants bloom now, which ones cure aches, which ones sing to sleep if chewed too long. There is no hour to check, no news to read, no mirror. but she feels the rhythm of the day in her body, in the sky, in the way the light presses gently through the trees. Tonight, you will follow her, not with urgency, not with noise, but with a quiet curiosity, the kind that only comes when the modern world has been tucked gently away. As you drift through her day, you may find your breath slows, your mind softens. You may find yourself imagining what it means to live, not just without luxury, but without the need for it. Because she, this woman, she knew beauty without paintings. She knew loyalty without rings. She knew rhythm without music. And perhaps, just perhaps, she knew peace without perfection. So let the story begin, not with a bang, but with breath, with earth, with footsteps so ancient they echo only in dreams. Let us walk with her, barefoot, slow, unhurried, into the soft shadows of history, and see what she saw, feel what she felt. Hear, if we can, the distant lullaby of the first women. Welcome to her world. It begins now. The night is not yet finished, but its darkest breath has passed. Overhead, the stars begin their slow retreat, blinking one by one into the deepening blue, as if pulled gently under by an unseen tide. The cold still lingers, the kind of cold that curls around the bones and seeps into the skin. But it is a familiar cold, one that does not surprise. Beneath the shallow curve of stone that forms the shelter's roof, not a house, not a home as we might know it, but a hollow in the earth's skin, there is movement. It is subtle. Not the bustling wakefulness of clocks or alarms, but something softer, almost imperceptible. The slow, unconscious stirrings of bodies wrapped in fur and hide, curled beside one another, not only for warmth, but for the security that only proximity offers in a world still untamed. Among these figures lies a woman, neither young nor old in the modern sense, but somewhere in between, marked by the rhythm of seasons more than years. Her body has learned the weight of days without counting them. She sleeps on a bed not of springs or feathers, but of moss, dried grass, and flattened earth, a cradle shaped by repetition. And it is this repetition, this ritual of rising before the others, that draws her now from the soft embrace of sleep. She does not open her eyes all at once. Waking here is not abrupt. It is a slow surfacing, like the thawing of frost under morning sun. Her breath is visible in the dim air, rising in small puffs that drift upward before vanishing into the darkness above. She listens, not for danger, but for silence, the kind of silence that holds the promise of safety. No low growls in the underbrush, no sudden rustling near the edge of the camp, no shift in the patterns of night. It is, for now, a still world. She eases herself up, careful not to disturb the others. There is a child's leg draped over her hip, and she gently lifts it aside, pressing her palm to the warm curve of a back before drawing away. In the faint half-light that filters through the mouth of the cave, she moves with the precision of someone who has done this 1,000 times. Her hands find the pouch with the firestone, the bundle of kindling kept dry beneath a carved stone. The fire has died down to its sleeping heart, a scattering of coals buried under ash, glowing faintly like the last memories of a dream. She kneels beside it, brushing the ash aside with fingers that carry the knowledge of touch more than thought. A few careful breaths, a patient strike of stone on steel, and the embers blink open. It is not dramatic. There is no flare, no heat that scorches. It is slow, a coaxing. The flame comes when it is ready, not when it is summoned. As the fire begins to stretch and flicker, its golden light reaches the walls around her. Rough surfaces etched by age and smoke. Shadows emerge. Shapes that, in the night, seemed solid and unknown now become belongings. A basket patched with sinew, a string of dried herbs hung from a bent branch, a hollowed stone bowl that caught last night's rain. These things are not decorative. They are not collected for their beauty. And yet, in their utility, there is a kind of elegance, an order to life that does not require language to explain itself. She takes the basket and steps outside, her feet pressing into the cold earth, with the familiarity of one who does not expect the world to be comfortable, but who has learned how to move within it. Outside, the trees are only shadows still. The world is not yet awake, but it is watching. The birds have not begun their chorus. The insects have retreated for the day. There is only the sound of wind in the branches, a soft exhale, as though the forest itself is stretching from sleep. She moves slowly, not because she is tired, but because there is no reason to rush. There is time in this life for stillness. The tasks will come soon, the gathering, the preparing, the tending, but now, in this quiet before dawn, there is only the act of being. She walks a little way to the stream, its waters dark but moving, a quiet whisper that never stops. She crouches and cups water in her hands, splashing it gently across her face, her neck, her arms. There is no soap, no mirror, only sensation, the cold bite of it against her skin, the way it brings her more fully into waking. The stream has not changed. Its banks shift slightly with the rains, its stones move, but the rhythm is constant. She has seen this same water pass in countless moods, swollen with snowmelt, choked with fallen leaves, frozen in stillness. And yet each morning, it greets her again, as if waiting. She dips the edge of her basket in the shallows, letting the water soften the fibers before she turns back toward the shelter. The sky has begun to lighten, not yet bright, but the blue has thinned. She can see now the silhouettes of trees, the curve of a distant ridge. Smoke from the rekindled fire curls upward behind her, thin and white, blending with the mist. Inside the shelter, there is movement again. A small child sits up, blinking slowly. The woman places the basket down and moves to lift the child into her lap, wrapping them both in the same hide. There is no conversation, only the shared warmth of skin and breath, the familiarity of closeness. Others begin to stir, a cough, a groan, a murmured word that is more sound than speech. The fire crackles softly now, offering light and scent and comfort. She feeds it slowly, adding sticks one by one. The fire is not just for warmth. It is the heart of the shelter. It is memory and warning and protection. It is presence. There is no distinction here between sacred and mundane. The act of making fire, of fetching water, of holding a child, these are not chores. They are life. Each motion has meaning, because each motion is necessary. She does not think of them as tasks. She does not divide her time into parts. There is no hour for breakfast, no scheduled break, no moment when something begins or ends. Time here is felt, not measured. It bends with the sun, with the hunger in the belly, with the ache in the hands. The others rise slowly. A man brings in a branch heavy with dry moss. An elder rubs a hand across tired eyes. A young girl lifts a stone toy, carved by someone now long gone. There is no clear hierarchy here, no shouted orders. The group flows like water, each person slipping into roles shaped by age, by ability, by need. The woman moves among them, offering pieces of dried root, stoking the fire again. Her eyes scan the cave, not with worry, but with the attentiveness of someone whose life has always depended on noticing. A crack in the ceiling, a shift in the wind, a missing child. Today will be much like yesterday, and tomorrow will likely be the same. But this does not breed boredom. In a world where survival is uncertain, predictability is a blessing. The rhythms of the day, rising, tending, walking, returning, are a comfort. A lullaby shaped by earth and breath and repetition. The shelter itself is humble. Stone walls, soot darkened. Bones stacked in corners for tools or memory. Small trinkets carved from bone or antler, worn smooth by fingers. A few marks scratched into stone, their meanings lost but not forgotten. The air smells of smoke, of damp fur, of crushed herbs and ash. It is not unpleasant. It is a smell of continuity, of life lived close to the world. And as the sky continues to brighten, the woman wraps a leather band around her wrist, a simple piece, but perhaps with meaning. A gift, a memory, a talisman. She steps again toward the mouth of the shelter, looking out not for danger now, but for the day. The forest before her is vast, but she knows its paths. She knows where the berries bloom, where the bees sleep, where the deer leave traces in the moss. She knows, too, which parts of the forest are to be avoided, not out of fear, but out of respect. There are places where the wind moves differently, where trees bend in silence, where stories are left unspoken. She breathes deeply and turns back. There is a root to crush, a pot to warm, a child to soothe. The fire burns brighter now. It crackles not with urgency, but with life. Around her, the others begin to speak, not in sentences, but in sounds, in fragments, in the language of shared understanding. A glance, a gesture, a low hum. It is enough. The day has begun, not with announcement, but with presence. And for her, that is all it needs. The day has now crept fully into being, though the sun is still hidden behind the high line of trees to the east. It filters gently through branches, like a soft hand reaching down through the canopy, laying light across stones and soil with no sense of urgency. And as it does, the woman, our quiet guide through this ancient rhythm, prepares herself for the familiar motion of leaving the shelter behind. There is no farewell, no grand declaration of purpose. Only a glance, a nod, the lifting of her basket, and the soft footfalls that carry her away from fire and kin into the dense and whispering wild. She does not walk quickly. In this life, haste serves little purpose and often invites mistake. Each step is measured not by distance, but by awareness of the curve of a root hidden in shadow of the sticky snap of a low-slung branch, of the subtle signs that mark the presence of others who share this land. Claw marks on bark, a tuft of fur snagged on thorns, the sudden stillness of birds. These things speak to her in a language without words, and she listens not with thought, but with body. She does not consider herself separate from this place. She is not a visitor. She moves through it as naturally as wind through leaves, her presence neither announced nor resisted. Around her, the forest is not silent. It is alive with the hum of life, but not in the way cities are loud. This is a different kind of sound, one that breathes rather than blares. The rustle of leaves, the clicking of insects, the low coo of birds far above all of it forms a kind of lullaby, one that she has known since before memory began. And with every step, her eyes scan the undergrowth for signs, not of danger, though that is always a part of it, but of offering. A root exposed by erosion, a cluster of berries heavy with dew, a fallen branch stripped by ants. She does not harvest greedily. The forest is not a store to be emptied, but a partner to be respected. She takes only what is ready, only what she can carry, only what she knows she will use. In her hands is a digging stick worn smooth by years of touch, shaped not for precision, but for familiarity. She kneels beside a patch of earth, where she knows tubers grow, their signs marked not by labels, but by the shape of the leaves, the shade of green, the way the stems lean toward the light. She presses the stick into the soil, slow and deliberate, lifting the earth without tearing it. The tuber beneath is pale and firm, holding the memory of sun and rain within its skin. She brushes the dirt away, places it in her basket, and moves on. Each find is a kind of prayer, though she would not call it that. There are no chants, no temples, no altars, here only action. But in that action is reverence, a kind of communion. The world provides, and she answers not with entitlement, but with gratitude spoken in the quiet language of care. She scatters a few seeds where she digs. She leaves some roots untouched. She avoids the youngest plants, not because she has studied ecology or sustainability, but because she has watched and learned and remembered. Knowledge here is passed not in books, but in patterns. What was eaten last season, what grew back, what didn't. And memory, in this life, is survival. She finds mushrooms, two delicate caps hiding in the shade, clustered like secrets beneath rotting logs. Not all are safe, some are bitter, some are deaf. But she knows the difference. Her mother taught her. Her mother's mother taught her. The knowledge is not written, but it lives in her fingertips, in the way she sniffs the air before picking, in the slight pressure she applies to the stalk to test its give. These are her ingredients, not gathered from market stalls or sorted into jars, but plucked from the breath of the land itself. The fire, meanwhile, back at the shelter, is still alive, tended by others who take turns in her absence. It is not her burden alone, though often it is her touch that brings it to life. The fire is central. It warms, it warns, it cooks, it comforts. Around it, life takes shape. And later today, it will transform what she carries into nourishment, not simply through flame, but through ritual. For in this world, the act of feeding is not just necessity. It is identity. It is continuity. It is one of the few things that binds past and present, youth and elder, life and memory, into one shared motion. By midday, the basket is heavier. She has gathered roots and shoots, berries both tart and sweet, a few eggs stolen gently from a low nest, cradled in dry moss. Her shoulders ache. Her hands are streaked with dirt and sap. But she does not complain. There is no one to complain to, and no expectation that life should be easy. Ease is not the measure of a good day here. A full basket is. Safe return is. Laughter around the fire is. She retraces her steps, avoiding places where the grass has been disturbed, too deeply places where larger predators may roam. She listens. She waits. She watches. And when she is certain, she moves. The forest opens again before her, not like a gate, but like an old friend stepping aside to allow her through. And as the light shifts from white to gold, as shadows begin to stretch longer across the ground, she returns to the shelter, not with fanfare, but with the calm satisfaction of rhythm completed. The children run to her, not out of hunger, though it is that too, but out of recognition. She carries the promise of flavor, of texture, of care. She kneels and lets them touch the basket, lift the leaves, gasp at the eggs. This is part of it. Learning, knowing, the slow unfolding of knowledge passed hand to hand. She does not rush the cooking. There are no stoves, no timers. She adds roots to the hot stones beside the fire, wraps them in leaves, lets the heat pull the bitterness from their flesh. Mushrooms are skewered with twigs, turned gently, watched carefully. She adds herbs not just for taste, but for balance. Some soothe the stomach, some thin the blood, some call forth sleep. Her choices are precise, though no one has ever written them down. She stirs with a carved bone spoon, tests the scent with her nose, adjusts with a sprinkle of dried bark or ground seed. And as the food begins to soften and simmer, the air fills with the aroma of earth and smoke, of oil released from roots, of damp wood meeting flame. It is not the scent of spice or sweetness, not the sugar-laden perfumes of modern kitchens. It is deeper, older. It smells like memory, like survival, like stories told without words. They eat not in silence, but in softness. There is chatter, laughter, the babble of children, the murmuring of those too tired to speak in full. The food is shared not by portion, but by presence. Hands reach across firelight. Bites are passed from elder to child. There is no ceremony, but there is care. And in that care, there is ritual. She eats last, or near to last, not because she is lesser, but because she watches. She makes sure. That is part of her role. Not a title, not a position, but a way of being. The provider ensures the provided are full before herself, and when she does eat, it is not rushed. Each bite is savored, not for flavor, but for knowing what it took to bring it here, from seed to stalk, from root to hand, from hand to flame. When the meal ends, the remains are not discarded carelessly. Bones are set aside for tools. Ash is brushed into a pile for future warmth. Bits uneaten are carried away to feed the ground again. Waste is not a concept here. Everything has another purpose, another cycle. Even the shell of the egg, crushed and buried, will harden the soil around a sapling's roots. And she knows this, not with diagrams or data, but with the wisdom of doing. As the fire dies lower again, and the sky shifts once more toward the long shadow of evening, she sits quietly, her hands resting on her knees. The children are tired. The men clean tools or mend snares. The elders speak softly in corners. But she watches the flames, listens to their crackle, and breathes in the smell of what has been. Feeding in this world is not only survival. It is an act of connection to the land, to the body, to the memory of those who once gathered the same roots, boiled the same herbs, sat in the same postures beneath the same stars. She does not know their names, but she knows their hands. She feels their choices in the curve of her own. And tonight, when she closes her eyes, it will be with the knowledge that she has repeated something sacred, not written in stone or scripture, but held in the quiet cycle of foraging, fire, and feeding. This was not a job. This was not her task. It was her life. And in living it, she carved herself into time, not with monuments or metal, but with the soft, unbroken repetition of care. The fire is lower now, not dying, but resting. Its flames lean gently toward the night as the sun dips behind the line of trees, surrendering the sky to violet and smoke. The warmth radiates outward in slow pulses, brushing the faces of those gathered around it. It is not yet time for stories. Not yet time for sleep. There is still work to be done, but not the kind of work that hurries or hammers. These are the slow tasks of hands and memory, of things shaped not by force, but by time. This is the world of women's technologies, soft tools, subtle crafts, invisible innovations passed not through invention, but through repetition, so ancient it has become breath. She sits cross-legged on the packed dirt floor, her knees tucked under a fur that has long since lost its original shape, but not its warmth. Before her lies a half-woven net strands of twisted sinew, gathered from the tendons of a deer days before. Each strand has been cleaned, scraped, soaked, and dried, made pliable again, over steam, and shaped now with the slow rhythm of practiced fingers. She does not count the knots. She does not measure the rows. Her hands know the pattern even if her mind drifts. This neck will be used in days to come, perhaps, to carry firewood, perhaps to trap small birds, perhaps to cradle a newborn. Its purpose is not fixed. That is the way of her tools. They serve the needs that arise, not the ones predicted. All around her, similar work unfolds in silence. Another woman sharpens a stone tool, not by striking, but by grinding, pressing the edge against a slab in slow circular motions, again and again, until it is just sharp enough to slice bark, but not so fine as to break. A third woman scrapes hide with a flake of obsidian, removing the last threads of sinew so the skin can be softened and worked. There is no chatter, but there is togetherness. They do not need to speak to share this moment. The movements are familiar, the sounds of stone and fiber and breath, creating a quiet music known only to those who have sat in this circle before and will sit in it again. These tools, these humble creations of hand and mind, are not recorded in the grand histories of war and empire, but they are the backbone of survival. No spear is thrown, no shelter is built, no child is raised, no body is fed without the work of these hands. The baskets that carry roots, the threads that tie weapons, the hides that cover skin against frost, all shaped by women in the rhythm of evening. Not as artisans in search of acclaim, but as keepers of a craft that is passed mouth to mouth, hand to hand, without ever being named. Textiles, in this world, are not the bolts of colored cloth that spill from modern markets. They are threads made of what the world gives. Bark peeled from trees, fibers pulled from stems, sinew taken from the hunted. The process is slow and sacred. Fibers are softened with water, then rolled between palm and thigh, twisted into cords, cords into strands, strands into something stronger. She weaves not for beauty alone, though beauty sometimes finds its way in, but for necessity. A net to fish, a pouch to carry seeds, a sling for a tired child. Each item carries the touch of its maker. Each knot is a whisper of care. Even the tools themselves carry memory. A stone grinder, passed down from mother to daughter, holds the fingerprints of generations. Its surface has been worn smooth not by erosion, but by years of use. The grooves on its face are not flaws, but records marks made by seeds crushed in hunger, by herbs ground in healing, by pigments mixed for rituals now forgotten. When she runs her hand along its curve, she feels not just the stone, but the weight of all those who have used it before. It is, in its quiet way, a family tree without branches. She turns now to a piece of hide that has been curing for days, stretched tight over a frame of bent wood. The smell is faint, but lingering of smoke and skin and the earth where the deer once fell. It is stiff in places, supple in others. She weights it with a sponge made from moss and water, rubbing it in wide, slow circles. Her tools are simple. A flake of stone, a shard of bone, a heavy rock with a smooth side. But her skill makes them sharp as knives, nimble as needles. With care, she slices thin strips, working the hide into a shape that will soon be something else. A wrap, a pouch, a covering for the hands or the feet. These are not clothes for display. They are second skins layered, tied, softened by wear. They carry warmth, but also story. A cut near the hem may mark a moment of danger. A burn by the edge may recall a night too close to flame. Nothing is discarded unless it is beyond saving. And even then, scraps become padding, stuffing, cordage. Waste in this world is not a concept. Everything becomes something else. There is no distinction here between tool and art. A carved bone pin may be etched with lines that follow no function but feel familiar. A handle wrapped in dyed thread may hold color not for utility, but because beauty brings joy. She does not separate the two. To create is to care. To decorate is to remember. Even a grinding stone may carry a spiral scratched faintly into its base, a mark made during a moment of idleness or longing or love. These things are not called art. They are not signed, but they speak softly across time. And when the work is done for the moment, when the thread is tied off, when the hide is laid to rest, she does not admire her creations with pride, but with readiness. These tools will be used. They will become part of the body, the camp, the day. They will gather stains, wear down, be mended, be remade. Nothing here is permanent, but everything is part of a circle creation, use, decay, rebirth. The thread frays and becomes the start of another thread. She teaches the young without teaching. They sit near her, watching. They ask questions not with words, but with hands. A child picks up the sinew, twists it the wrong way, and she gently untwists it, re-rolling it the right way without correction. The lesson is not in scolding, but in repetition. Try again. Try slower. Try differently. Over time, the fingers remember even when the mind forgets. And this is how the knowledge travels through touch, through failure, through small adjustments that carry the wisdom of ages. As night deepens and the stars begin their long gaze, the tools are laid aside. Not hidden, not locked away, but placed where they will be needed next. The baskets are stacked, the fibers tucked under weight, the stones cleaned and cooled. She wipes her hands on the fur at her knees, not out of habit, but out of finality. The work of creation has paused. The work of rest has begun. And in the quiet that follows, in the hush between fire and sleep, she feels something deeper than satisfaction. She feels connection. These tools are not just for utility. They are the extension of her presence. When another carries her basket, they carry her memory. When another eats from the bowl she carved, they share in her labor. She is not known by name in some grand tale, but she is known by the things she made. And in the world she lives in, that is enough. The cave is darkening now. The embers pulse with less heat. The air cools with the scent of ash and fur and earth. Around her, the people of her shelter settle into their resting places, shaped by routine and trust. She wraps the thread around her wrist once, twice, a habit without origin. And she lies back, not into silence, but into the soft rustle of a world still turning gently. This night, as every night, she sleeps among her tools, not out of necessity, but out of comfort. They are part of her. They are the echoes of her voice in a time before writing, the shadows of her thoughts in a world without mirrors. And long after her body is gone, perhaps they will remain a stone blade dulled at the edge, a net woven from sinew turned, brittle with age, a mark on the wall that means something only to those who have watched such hands at work. This is her technology, made not of wires or gears, but of patience, of rhythm, of purpose shaped in silence, and it is no less worthy, no less enduring, no less human. The day has melted softly into evening, not with a sudden drop of light, but with a slow, golden sigh, as if the world itself were exhaling after the weight of survival. The sun, now gone behind the far ridges, leaves behind its lingering warmth in the rocks, and the scent of wild herbs carried low on the cooling air. The forest hums in new tones now. Creatures that stirred by daylight have curled into silence, while those who dance in shadow stretch quietly into wakefulness. But here, in the shelter cradled by stone and slope, a smaller world prepares for night, not in fear but in comfort. The woman sits once more before the fire, its light now gentler, more orange than gold, flickering in long, slow arcs across the rough curve of the cave wall. The flames crackle low and lazy, not with hunger, but with satisfaction, and around them gather bodies shaped by labor and kinship, worn but warm, drawn to the hearth like petals to light. This moment, this shared breath at the end of a long rhythm, is not the absence of labor, but its reward. There is no word for rest in her tongue as we understand it, no division between work and stillness, only the rhythm of doing and the rhythm of being. And now is the time for being. The tools have been put away, the nets hung, the stones cooled and set aside. Bellies are full, not overstuffed, not indulgent, but quieted with the satisfaction of enough. The children lean against thighs and shoulders, eyelids heavy but still curious, still listening for the voices that fill this hour with meaning. For what comes now, in the hush between dusk and sleep, is not a lesson, not a sermon, but something older stories. Not read aloud from books, but breathed from memory, from heart, from the shared well of knowing that only the firelight can awaken. She speaks, not because she was chosen, but because it is her turn, or perhaps because the cadence of her voice feels right for tonight. Her words do not rush. They flow like water down a smooth path, weaving through the spaces between breath and attention. She tells of a time before the eldest they were born, a time when the stars had different names, or no names at all, a time when the trees whispered secrets that animals could understand. She speaks of a bird who once sang the first flame into being, and a bear who stole it and hid it beneath the earth. The children listen, not because they believe or disbelieve, but because the sound of story is a kind of warmth, a kind of comfort, like a blanket woven of air and voice. The older ones nod slowly, their hands still busy fingers twisting fibers, sharpening dull points, curling soft leaves into little bundles of scent. They have heard these stories before. They may have told them, but that does not diminish their magic. Repetition here is not boredom. It is belonging. To tell a story again is to anchor the present to something deeper, to remind the fire and the ears gathered around it that we have been here before, that we will return again. That time is not a straight line, but a circle drawn in ash and smoke. She tells another tale, this time of a girl who walked so far west that she met the edge of the sky and asked the moon for a new name. The sky listened. The moon did not speak, but the girl returned with a silver rock that glowed when she sang to it. No one questions how far west one must walk to meet the sky. No one asks why the moon would give gifts. That is not the point. The story is not about geography. It is about wonder. And in this world, wonder is not something set aside for childhood. It is as necessary as fire, as grounding as the stone beneath their feet. Now, the smallest child, barely able to speak in full thoughts, leans forward, clutching a smooth stone as if it too carries some echo of that silver glow. The woman notices, but does not interrupt. She lets the child hold belief gently in both hands, the way one might hold a moth softly, without gripping, allowing it to flutter and rest. Belief here is not a rigid thing. It is allowed to shift with the stars, to take on new shapes, to be passed along like the fire's breath from ember to ember. The stars now are fully awake, scattered in their ancient patterns above the canopy, though the trees still obscure all but the brightest, and even those are enough. The group around the fire knows their names, not in the way we know them, not with constellations mapped and catalogued, but with stories. That one is the elk that never tires. That cluster is the basket of the first mother. That faint streak across the sky is the river that divides the land of dreams from the land of waking. These are not lessons to be memorized. They are companions. The stars are part of the world in the same way as trees and rivers and wind. They are not distant. They are listening. She sings now, not a song in our sense, but a low, lilting chain of sounds that rise and fall in rhythm with her breath. It is not meant for performance. It is a lullaby without words, or perhaps with words so old they have forgotten their meaning. The melody drifts into the air, curls into the smoke, lingers above their heads before dissolving into the night. A few join in, humming or echoing, the way a fire crackles in response to kindling. It is not about harmony. It is about presence, about weaving one voice into another, until no one knows where sound ends and silence begins. The laughter comes too, not loud or brash, but soft, like leaves brushing against each other in a breeze. A boy, now almost grown, mimics the old hunter's limp in exaggerated fashion, and the circle ripples with quiet chuckles. Someone throws a piece of bark at him, not in anger but in play. Another tells a half-true story about the time a squirrel stole their food, and adds details that grow more absurd with every telling. It is not meant to be accurate. It is meant to make the fire feel warmer. This, too, is ritual. Not solemn, not sacred in the strict sense, but deeply human. The act of sitting together, of sharing sound, of holding space for both memory and invention. This is how culture survives. Not in monuments or laws, but in the comfort of shared invention. The woman does not need to tell the others that this matters. She does not need to explain its significance. They feel it in the way their shoulders drop, the way their eyes soften, the way even the youngest learns to listen between the words. She leans back now, propped on one elbow, her other hand trailing through the dirt as if searching for something buried just beneath. Perhaps it is a thought not yet formed. Perhaps it is nothing. The fire flares briefly as someone adds another branch. The sparks dance upward, vanishing before they meet the sky. The flames shift again, and the shadows on the wall begin a new story, one told not in voice, but in motion. Shapes flicker, an arm raised, a head turning, the long curve of a back silhouetted against stone. And for a moment, the entire shelter becomes a kind of theater, the rock wall a canvas for unspoken dreams. She watches the flames, her eyes reflecting them not with intensity, but with the kind of gaze one gives to an old friend. And in the quiet that follows, when the stories have faded and the youngest have begun to drift into sleep, she thinks of those who told these stories before her, of her own mother, whose voice cracked on winter nights but never failed to sing, of the woman who taught her the knots, the herbs, the right wood for the right smoke. Their faces blur now in memory, but their presence lingers in tone, in habit, in the soft patterns of a voice that knows exactly when to pause and when to begin again. The fire is lower now, almost all ember and whisper. The circle has loosened. Some have laid down, wrapped in fur and quiet breath. Others sit half dreaming, eyes half closed, lulled not into boredom, but into peace. She brushes ash from her hands and lies back, staring up at the cave roof, where soot and time have painted patterns more permanent than pigment. Outside, the stars wheel slowly, their pace unbothered by the needs of those below. And here, in this moment suspended between wakefulness and sleep, between ancient repetition and tomorrow's quiet promise, she feels something deeper than memory. It is not hope, not fear, not even love in the way we speak of it. It is belonging, to fire, to voice, to the slow rhythm of a life lived close to the earth, shaped not by ambition but by care. She does not know that one day, far away in a world too fast to hear its own breath, people will wonder what her life was like. She does not know that stories will be told not by firelight, but by glowing screens, that her world will become a question asked by those who have forgotten how to sit still. But in this moment, none of that matters, because she is here, and she is enough. And the night will carry her softly, as it always has, into dreams where stories continue without sound. The fire flickers once more. A child sighs in sleep. The stars above remain, and so does she. The fire has long since gone to embers, and the people of the shelter lie wrapped in quiet breath and woven hides, their dreams untroubled beneath a vast, humming sky. Outside, dew has begun to form on leaves, turning every edge into a silver threshold. The trees sleep, the birds wait, and the world holds its breath in that fragile space before dawn stirs again. But far away from the warmth of the fire and the stories it cradles, deeper in the soil and deeper still in time, something else sleeps unmoving, unspeaking, yet never truly silent. The bones. They lie beneath the ground as if listening, not scattered, not lost, but arranged by care, by ritual, by the hands of those who could not bear to simply leave. Sometimes they lie curled, as if returning to the womb of the earth. Sometimes stretched out gently, with stones at their sides, ochre at their feet, or shells laid tenderly near their fingers. They are old now, very old, older than language perhaps, older than memory, but not without story. And slowly, gently, we have begun to hear them. The soil keeps secrets, but it does not forget. It presses close around the shapes of those who came before, preserving what it can. A sloping skull, a wide pelvis, the long femur of someone who once carried both burdens and children. These are not just bones. They are maps, not of cities or conquest, but of living. The wear on joints, the healing of fractures, the groove etched by repeated movement, all of these whisper the rhythms of a life not written down, but written into the body. And the bodies that whisper loudest are often those of women. For a long time, we did not listen. We unearthed these bones and assumed a narrow jaw, a tool near the hip, surely a man. A small frame, a necklace of beads, perhaps a wife, perhaps a child. We brushed dust from their ribs and imagined them in the shadows of others. But slowly, As science softened into curiosity and technology bent its ear to the past, the bones began to speak again, more clearly, more insistently. There is a woman in northern Spain, buried in a cave half filled with red clay and fallen leaves. Her skull is strong, her teeth worn flat, her knees marked by the kind of strain that only comes from constant movement. Around her lie fragments of tools, not beside her, not tucked away, but within her reach, as if placed there in recognition, not decoration. For years, she was assumed to be an observer in someone else's story. But now, we know she carried her own. Elsewhere, on the steps, a skeleton lies with a bow still beside her, its curve long since slackened into splinters. The shaft of an arrow rests near her thigh. At first, this was thought to be a mistake. Surely the items had shifted over time. But the bones themselves said otherwise. Her arms told of drawing weight again and again. Her shoulders bore the tale of recoil, of aim, of release. She was not an anomaly. She was a participant. And in the soft sand of a burial in modern-day Peru, a grave once thought to belong to a warrior man was revealed through careful DNA and closer eyes to be a girl no older than 17 buried, with blades and pigments, flint and fishing line. We had misread her not because she lied, but because we had not yet learned how to hear. The forgotten mothers did not leave us words, but they left weight. Their hips widened for birth. Their hands thickened from gathering. Their spines bent from carrying others, again and again. In the calcium of their bones, we find repetition, and in that repetition, we find the shape of lives that formed the foundation of everything we are. Not decorative, not supporting, but central. Every man born into history passed through the bones of a woman first. And when we study these remains, not in haste, not with bias, but with quiet patience, we begin to see patterns not only of biology, but of intent. Some were buried with care, their graves lined with ochre, feathers, or carvings. Others rest under stones painted with symbol spirals, hands, shapes that echo the womb. These are not random gestures. They are signs of mourning, of memory, of meaning. The people who placed them there did not see these women as background. They saw them as origin. The pelvis of one woman, found near the Danube, bore the scars of many births. Her spine had fused near the base, likely from straying. Her ribs had healed from a break long past. And yet, in her grave were tokens: a small carved bird, the tooth of a fox, beads smoothed by fingers. She was not forgotten. She was laid down with gentleness. Someone wept when the earth was packed around her. Someone sang, perhaps, or laid a hand on her shoulder one last time. Her bones remember that touch. There are patterns in the teeth, too. In the wear of enamel, we see who chewed bark, who ground grain, who held sinew between their molars to soften it for thread. These marks are not glamorous. They are not the remnants of glory or power, but they are the grooves of constancy, of care, of a kind of strength that rarely makes it into legends, but lives longer than legend ever could. And there are children, too. Small bones tucked near larger ones. Infants cradled in arms even in death. Girls with shells braided into their hair. We used to assume they were accidental, marginal. But now we see them as part of the cycle, as those who might have grown to carry the same baskets, weave the same cloth, tell the same stories by the same fire. Their silence is not absence. It is waiting. We do not always know what the bones are trying to tell us. Sometimes the evidence is partial, the message blurred by time and pressure. But there is one thing they never fail to communicate: presence. She was here. She worked. She carried. She was mourned. These truths do not require inscriptions. They live in the marrow, in the curve of spine, in the soil that settled slowly around her form. And when we listen not with ears tuned to conquest, but with hearts quiet enough to notice, we begin to understand the history we were taught was only ever half a song. The other half lies beneath us, sleeping still, waiting for the wind to uncover it again, waiting for our hands to brush the dirt gently aside, waiting for us to say, not with surprise, but with recognition, she was always part of this. The forgotten mothers are no longer so easily erased. They emerge in every excavation, not as anomalies, but as evidence of a truth we once knew instinctively, that survival is not built on heroics alone, but on endurance, on hands that weave and catch and carry, on voices that soothe, on hips that birth, on feet that walk the same paths again and again, because someone must. They are not queens in the way stories define royalty. They wore no crowns, claimed no thrones. But their sovereignty lay elsewhere in the steadiness of their labor, in the clarity of their love, in the certainty that what they did mattered, even if no one would write it down. Until now. Tonight, as you lie in your own shelter, whether beneath stone or ceiling, know that the ground beneath you remembers, that the silence it holds is not empty, but echoing with lives that made yours possible. They are not ghosts. They are not myths. They are mothers. They are makers. And though their names were lost, their legacy lingers in the tilt of your jaw, the line of your brow, the way your hands know how to hold. They are not forgotten. The bones remember. And now, so do we. Before the plow carved lines across the earth, before seeds were kept in jars, and fields were drawn into squares, before the word wife implied a role tied to hearth and harvest, there was a world not ruled by ownership, but by rhythm, by the movements of animals. The seasons of fruiting trees, the rise and fall of rivers, too wild to be tamed. And in that world, she was there. The woman not as a helper to a man, not as a keeper of children while others hunted, but as a full participant in the story of survival. Long before agriculture rearranged the shape of human society, gender was not yet a fixed sentence carved into the foundation of life, but something closer to a shadow cast by circumstance, bending and shifting as needed, as fluid as the streams that crisscrossed the valleys where her feet pressed gently into the soil. She was there, stepping softly alongside the others as they tracked her movements not through command, but through consensus. There was no general, no war chief, no list of roles etched into stone. What mattered was who had the knowledge, who could see the path where no footprints were visible, who could feel the tension in the wind and say, "They're near." Sometimes it was her. Sometimes it wasn't. The group responded to skill, not decree. And so, in that liminal world before rows of grain taught humans to divide not only land but labor, she moved through space with authority born of ability, not expectation. There are places, burial sites, campsites, fire rings half buried in ash, where her presence still flickers like flame behind glass. In ancient encampments along riverbanks, her footprints are found beside spear points. Her remains, when unearthed, carry the muscular patterns of someone who ran, who carried, who endured. Her teeth wear the grooves of leatherwork and tool use. Her joints show the stress of travel, not taken lightly. She was not sitting idle while others ventured out. She was there. When the hunt failed, her strategies for gathering sustained them. When it succeeded, her hands helped skin, cure, and cook. She was not on the edge of the circle. She was part of its center, facing the same wind, tasting the same hunger, and pressing forward with the same quiet resilience. And yet, this truth was long obscured, covered not by soil, but by the sediment of assumption. As agriculture took hold, it brought more than crops. It brought the notion of property, and with it, a recalibration of roles. Fields could be owned. Harvests could be measured. Time could be controlled. The wild rhythms of foraging gave way to the domesticated beat of seasons, marked by planting and reaping. And as the land was parceled, so too were the people. Tasks became assigned. Identities hardened. The work of the body was no longer something everyone shared, but something divided along lines that deepened with each generation. And slowly, the memory of her role before the field began to fade not because it was forgotten, but because those who recorded memory chose to write over it. But the bones do not lie, and neither do the tools. The grindstones worn smooth by women's hands were not passive things. They fed entire communities. The fish caught with nets she wove were not decorative. They were sustenance. The shelters she helped raise were not humble. They were innovations in survival. In caves across Europe and burial mounds across Asia, weapons have been found with the remains of women, not as anomalies, but as facts that challenge the neatness of our stories. These are not modern impositions, not anachronisms placed into the past. They are evidence. Quiet, yes, but enduring. Imagine her now, walking across a wet plain, her eyes scanning the horizon not for beauty, but for movement of birds above, of herds beyond, of shifts in the grass that speak of food, or danger, or both. She carries no title. She needs none. Her authority comes from memory, from instinct, from success born of experience. The others follow not because they are told to, but because she has found the path before, and she will again. She carries a child on one hip, a bundle of tools on the other, and moves with the deliberate pace of someone who knows that every breath counts. Her body is both weapon and refuge. Her knowledge is sharp as any blade. In those early camps, around those first fires, stories were told not to reinforce hierarchy, but to explain pattern. The bear returns to the river because the fish return. The moon disappears and returns again. The woman bleeds but does not die. These were not curiosities, they were wisdom. And the woman, in bleeding, birthing, nourishing, and enduring, was seen not as lesser, but as central to the cycle. Before gods had names, before temples had walls, the rhythms of her body were the first calendar, the first measure of time, the first mystery held sacred, not because she asked for worship, but because she was understood to be necessary. It is only later, much later, that these truths were rewrapped in myth, in metaphor, in symbols carved by hands that sought to explain, but also to control. But before the metaphor, there was the woman, real, breathing, there. She was there, shaping flint and fire, pressing seeds into soil before farming had a name, guiding migrations not with orders, but knowing. And when someone fell sick, she knew which bark would ease the breath. When someone died, she knew how to place the body, how to honor the passage. She did not need religion to do this. She needed memory. And that she had in abundance. The traces of her are subtle now, scattered across landscapes that have changed beyond recognition. But they remain, in the spiral grooves of carved bone found in an Anatolian plain, in the soot-darkened ceilings of painted caves where small handprints outnumber large ones, in the residue of plant dyes found on fingernails preserved in ice. She was there in pigment, in pressure, in presence. And every one of these remnants says quietly, but clearly, the division you assumed was never absolute. The silence you assigned was never empty. The absence you imagined was never real. To imagine gender in the Paleolithic world as it is now is to project backwards from a map that did not yet exist. Before agriculture drew lines between labor and land, between inside and outside, between man and woman, the human experience was shaped by necessity, not by roles rehearsed over millennia. And necessity made her visible. Not in banners, not in laws, but in the rhythm of life sustained. She was not protected, she protected. She was not dependent, she was depended upon. Her hands were not idle. They were covered in sap, in blood, in soot. And when the fires dimmed, it was her voice that sang, not because it was assigned, but because it was remembered. So tonight, as you drift further into quiet, as your own breath steadies into rhythm, imagine her not as distant, not as hypothetical, but as part of the same human line that leads to you. She was there, not in the shadows, but in the circle, not behind, but beside. Before the fences, before the fields, Before the words for woman and man became duties etched into skin, there was just us. Moving, enduring, making, and among us always was her. The night stretches softly onward, the stars high now and fully bloomed, scattered across the sky like seeds flung by an ancient hand. Below them, the fire in the shelter flickers low and steady, casting long shadows across stone and skin, warm but no longer bright. Somewhere in the hush, a child murmurs in sleep, shifting beneath the fur of a parent's arm. A breath catches, then resumes, steady and slow, folded into the rhythm of night. And somewhere farther back, farther in time, deeper in memory, beyond even what the cave remembers, there was another child, born not with ceremony, but with breath and blood and the quiet certainty of women whose hands knew the curve of life before it took shape. She was alone, and yet not alone. In the woods, perhaps, or beside the mouth of the shelter. Not behind walls, not in sterile light, but surrounded by the trees that had watched her swell slowly with the seasons. Her belly round with mystery, her hips aching from long days of walking, her body heavy with the weight of two hearts. No midwife in the modern sense stood beside her. No machine whispered numbers into quiet panic. No scalpel waited under fluorescent hum. And yet, she was not helpless. She was not afraid. Her body was not a battlefield. It was a vessel. One shaped by millennia of mothers before her, each one leaving behind a whisper of instruction, written not in words, but in bone and breath and blood. She knew when the time came not by calendar or clock, but by the slow tightening deep within, like the earth drawing itself inward before rain. The others may have sensed it too. There were signs, the way she moved more slowly that day, the way she looked not outward, but inward, the way she gathered dry moss and laid it in a hollow she de-smoothed the day before. Perhaps an elder sat near her, silent but watching. Perhaps another woman, younger, brought her water from the stream, her eyes wide and uncertain. But no one commanded, no one intervened. Birth was not something done to her. It was something she did. And when the pain came, it did not scream. It arrived in waves, like the tide on a hidden shore. She breathed through it, not with training, but with trust. Her body, ancient and wise, knew how to open, knew how to yield without breaking. The cries that escaped her were not cries of fear, but of work. And the child, slippery and strange, arrived not into sterile air, but into the warmth of her hands and the scent of the fire she had lit the night before. There was no applause, only silence. And in that silence, a new sound. The first breath of someone never before seen, but already known. She held the child to her chest, not with hesitation, but with the familiarity of every woman who had come before. The blood cooled on her thighs. The afterbirth passed with its own rhythm. She did not flinch. She did not cry out. She wrapped them both in the fur she had prepared and leaned back against the earth. The world had not changed, and yet something had shifted. The fire burned the same. The stars wheeled the same slow arc above, and still, there was now a new heartbeat woven into the rhythm of the night. The others came, eventually. They approached slowly, respectfully, not with fanfare, but with small gifts. A strip of bark to chew, a smooth stone for her hand, a look held a little longer than usual. The child was not named. There were no names, not in the way we use them, but already it belonged. It was held by others, pressed to other chests, its cries answered not with panic, but with movement. A breast offered, a song hummed. The camp adjusted, subtly, to make room. No proclamation, just breath, just presence. And as the days passed, the bond grew not as a flash, but as a slow and constant hum. The child slept against her skin, fed when hungry, cried when cold, and was rarely alone. There were no cribs, no cradles, no separation. Mother and child were one body in two forms, each learning the other by scent and heartbeat, by pressure and pause. Her arms a home, her back a place of rest. She carried the child as she gathered, as she walked, as she sat by the fire. Her tasks continued, slower perhaps, but never stopped. The child adapted to the rhythm of her life, not the other way around. There was no manual for motherhood here, no theories, no charts. Only the quiet observation of others, the way an elder wrapped the infant close during rain, the way another soothed the fever with crushed leaves and cool stone. She learned not from instruction, but from proximity. And when the child's first fever came, she did not panic. She held close. She watched. She whispered soft things in a language older than speech, and she waited. Some children survived, some did not. And when one slipped away, wrapped in silence and breathless stillness, the sorrow was not less because it was expected. It was carried differently, not hidden, not exaggerated, but shared. A small burial, a stone placed. A song hummed that night that lingered longer than usual. The grief did not break her. It joined the layers of her strength. And the next time, when life stirred again inside her, she welcomed it not with forgetting, but with hope. This cycle of carrying, birthing, nursing, and mourning was not her identity alone. It was part of the collective breath of the group. Other women helped carry. Older children fetched water. Men brought meat and sat quietly nearby, unsure of how to help, but present nonetheless. Parenting was not a solitary act. It was a communal rhythm, shaped by necessity, but sustained by affection. And through it, bonds formed, not just between mother and child, but between siblings not bound by blood, between elders and infants, between memory and moment. The body changed with each birth. The hips widened further. The breasts sagged, heavier, more worn. The lines deepened around her eyes. She did not resent these marks. They were not flaws. They were maps. They told her story in folds and stretches. And when she saw the same shapes emerging on the bodies of the younger women, she smiled not with pride, but with recognition. She was part of something larger than herself, something that did not begin with her and would not end with her. And in that knowledge, there was peace. There were rituals, small and unspoken, a certain herb chewed to ease the cramps of birth, a necklace of carved wood passed from one mother to the next, a fire built higher on the nights when pain came stronger. These were not ceremonies with names. They were movements passed down in muscle and gesture, repeated because they worked, remembered because they mattered. No one called it tradition. It simply was. And as the children grew crawling first, then toddling, then running in circles near the edge of the camp, she did not pull them back with fear. She watched with a calm that came from having seen many falls, many scrapes, many recoveries. Her voice called them gently when needed. Her hands caught them when they stumbled. Her eyes followed even when she pretended not to watch. And when they slept, curled beside her, their small hands clinging to her chest or hair or necklace, she watched them not with ownership, but with wonder. This was not a perfect life. There were dangers, sickness, hunger, storms. But there was also joy. The first laugh. The warmth of a child's breath against her neck. The way a baby's hand curls around a finger, so tightly, as if trying to pull the world into focus. These things are not unique to now. They existed then. They existed always. And so too did the fatigue. The aching bones. The frustration when a child would not settle. The fear when a fever would not break. But she endured, not because she had no choice, but because endurance was not a burden. It was a form of love. A kind of devotion so ancient it did not need to be named. And one day, when her child, perhaps grown now, perhaps carrying a child of their own, looked at her with the same mixture of need and defiance, she smiled again, because she knew, because she had seen. because her body still remembered the first cry, the first breath, the first time she held life against her chest and knew that everything had changed. The children of her body did not always remain close. Some wandered, some died, some disappeared into the forest and returned only in stories. But they lived first in her blood, in her arms, in her breath. And that was enough. That was everything. And tonight, as the stars whisper their old, unchanging songs above us, perhaps you feel it too, that you too were once held that way. That somewhere in your lineage, hands like hers carried you. That you too were once curled against a heartbeat, warmed by fire, sung to sleep not by words, but by presence. That presence remains. The bond remains, unbroken, unforgotten, endlessly reborn. There is a hush in the ancient caves that speaks louder than any echo. Not the hush of emptiness, but the kind that fills a room just before someone speaks, or just after someone has made something beautiful and hasn't yet exhaled. In those deep, winding places where light no longer reaches naturally, where the sun cannot stretch, where wind does not whisper, where silence lies thick as moss on stone, there are marks. Red, ochre, black, shapes, hands, stories told in curves and lines, in smudges and stencils and figures drawn with a care so soft you can almost feel the breath of their creators pressed into the pigment. And in the slow quiet of these walls, we ask, was she the artist? Long ago, so long ago that time has wrapped those centuries into folds we can barely peel open. A woman, or perhaps many may, have stepped into darkness carrying a flickering flame. Not a torch for conquest, a flame for vision. A small, trembling light to push back the dark, just enough to see the walls rise around her. The floor was uneven, the ceiling low in places. Her bare feet pressed cold stone. Her other hand, free and steady, carried pigment-powdered stone, crushed berries, ash soaked in fat, mixed in a bowl of bone or bark, or held directly in her palm. She did not step into this place to be remembered, but the walls remember her still. There is something timeless about the way the lines move, smooth arcs of bison flank, long flowing antlers of a stag in motion, the deliberate handprints pressed against stone like an offering. The artists of these caves, Chauvet, Lascaux, Altamira, did not sign their names. They left no biographies, no titles, only traces. Yet for many decades, those traces were assumed to be masculine, as though the hand that created could not also cradle, as though the fingers that drew life into stone could not also bring life into the world. But assumptions, like time, fade when examined too closely. And as archaeologists turned to science, not to imagination, but to measurement, they began to notice something quiet and astonishing. The hands on the walls, those ghostly prints that hover like whispers, were small. Many were narrow. The finger ratios, the span of the palm, the wrist proportions, they pointed not to men alone. They pointed to women, to girls, to those whose voices we had never asked to hear. Imagine her, then, standing in that dim chamber, the rock damp with the breath of millennia, holding her hand against the wall and blowing pigment through a hollow reed. A soft exhalation PFFFF, and there it was, her outline, not her portrait, not a likeness, but a record of presence, a gentle defiance of disappearance. Not I was important, but simply I was here. She may have done it once. She may have done it many times. Some walls show dozens of prints, layered like memories, clustered in spirals or lines, reaching up toward ceilings as if toward stars. She may have climbed, stood on shoulders, reached with a tool. These acts were not accidents. They were intentions. And intention, even whispered through pigment, is a kind of voice. What did she see as she stepped back and looked at her work? Did the figures dance in the wavering firelight? Did the animals come to life as shadows played across them? Was she trying to capture memory? Or to summon it? To teach? or to dream? We do not know. That is the sacred space of silence between then and now. But what we do know is that she returned. Over generations, the art continued, new layers over old, not erasing, but joining, adding, speaking in a language not of words, but of images that reach across tens of thousands of years and still hold meaning. A gallop, a leap, a hunt, a hand. She was not a passive observer of the sacred. She was part of it. Perhaps she painted because she had seen the hunt and wanted to remember it. Perhaps she had dreamt it before it happened and wanted to honor the spirit of it. Perhaps she was neither prophet nor scribe, but simply someone who loved the way color moved across stone. That possibility matters. That the first artists may have created not for worship or power, but for the same reason we still do for expression, for beauty, for the quiet joy of making something that did not exist before. And around her, the others may have watched. A child, silent, wide-eyed. An elder, nodding in rhythm with her breath. Another woman grinding pigment. Another stirring fat into the bowl. The act of creation may have been solitary or shared, revered or ordinary, but the result remains. Caves filled with images so full of life that they seem to move still, as though the breath of the artist never truly left. We once thought these images belonged only to shamans, to mystics, to men with visions. But what if they belonged also to mothers, to daughters, to those who lived not apart from daily life but within it? The deer she painted may have been the same one she saw while nursing, the bison the same she helped carve for food. Her world was not divided into sacred and mundane. It was all part of one slow circle. Blood, birth, breath, pigment. One act flowed into the next. And when she painted, it was not with brush and canvas, not with the tools we imagine when we say art. It was with reed and finger, with stone and bone, with hands stained by other tasks. The same hands that wove nets and kneaded dough and bandaged wounds. Art was not separate. It was part of living, an extension of presence, a continuation of touch. Some of the figures are abstract grids, dots, spirals, symbols whose meanings have drifted beyond reach. But perhaps to her, they were a form of communication. Perhaps they were prayers, or names, or ways of marking the passing of time. Or perhaps they were simply beautiful. The human impulse to decorate, to make meaning, to play with shape and shadow, is not limited to any one gender or role. It is a shared inheritance. And hers, though long overlooked, may have been among the first. There is a cave in Indonesia where the outline of a woman's hand small, elegant rests beside the shape of a pig. Another in Argentina where a row of hands all left marks across the stone in rhythmic unity. In both, the hands speak not of dominance, but of belonging. Not of conquest, but of identity. They are not raised in power. They are pressed in presence. And they remain. When she pressed her hand against that stone, she could not have imagined the passage of time that would follow, the rivers that would shift, the languages that would rise and fall, the way that future humans would build towers and forget how to listen. But perhaps, just perhaps, she hoped the mark would last long enough for someone to see, not to know her name, not to explain her purpose, but simply to say, yes, someone lived here. Someone cared enough to leave this behind. And now we see. And now we listen. And now we ask not in doubt, but in wonder. Was she the artist? And the walls, in their quiet, gentle way, seemed to answer, yes, she was. The pigment has faded. The stone has cracked. The path to the cave is overgrown. But the art endures. Not because it demanded attention, but because it was made with care. And care is the most enduring language of all. She may not have considered herself a creator. She may not have sought an audience. But she made something that outlasted memory, that outlasted story. that cross time not by force, but by grace. Tonight, as the darkness deepens around you, and your own walls hold the echoes of your day, think of her not as myth, not as symbol, but as someone very real. Someone who once walked into the quiet, looked at the stone, and said, with nothing but her breath and her hand, "Let me leave something behind." And she did. Night does not end abruptly. It recedes slowly, pulling its shadows behind it like a tide drawing back into the ocean, reluctant to let go. And just as night folds gently into morning, so too, in the old world, did life pass into death, not with the harsh finality we so often imagine now, but with a quieter rhythm, a descent that was neither feared nor ignored, but met with hands that knew what to do when breath no longer came. In those early, unwritten years, death was not an interruption. It was not the end of a story. It was simply another threshold. And when a woman passed beyond that threshold, her body was not cast aside or hidden in haste. It was held, it was tended, and it was laid down with care. Because those who had lived close to the earth were returned to it not as waste, but as something sacred. In the still hush of the ancient world, we find the truth written in soil and stone. She was buried with reverence. There are places, now half swallowed by time, where the earth still remembers her. Places where her bones lie in soft curves beneath layers of dust and roots, where her final rest was marked not by marble, but by intention. A red smear of ochre across her pelvis. A necklace of pierced shells, curled gently around the base of her throat. A flint tool tucked beneath her hip, not sharp, not new, but worn by years of use, perhaps something she had touched daily. These were not offerings of grandeur. They were gestures of love, of memory, and above all, of continuity. When she died, it was not only her family who mourned. In those early bands where survival relied on closeness, everyone felt the absence. Her voice had once been part of the firelight. Her hands had woven the baskets. Her eyes had watched the children. And now that warmth had gone. But even so, her body was not feared. It was not unclean. It was part of the circle, as natural in stillness as it had been in breath. And so they gathered not in lines, not in procession, but as they always did quietly, in closeness, with intention drawn not from doctrine, but from knowing. The place was chosen carefully, not too close to water, not too exposed. Perhaps a hollow beneath a tree whose roots stretched like fingers toward the sky. Perhaps a niche in the shelter wall, or a shallow dip in the forest floor. There were no coffins, no markers etched in stone, only the soft press of hands shaping the ground. And into that space, they laid her, not dropped, not arranged, but placed, gently, slowly, as one would place something fragile into something eternal. Her body was not posed for vanity. It was curled, more often than not, as if asleep. The fetal position, some have called it. But perhaps it was more than that. Perhaps it was a way of remembering where life began curled in the darkness of the womb, and returning her to that same form, as though the earth itself would now carry her forward. She was not displayed. She was not dressed. But she was not abandoned either. Around her, they placed things. Objects she had touched, beads she had worn, stones she had shaped. These were not grave goods as we understand them, not status symbols or markers of rank. They were pieces of her life, chosen not to impress, but to accompany. Not to show what she owned, but to show what she was part of. And sometimes, in the deepest graves, there is color. Red ochre smeared on bones, yellow pigment on shells. We do not know what it meant, but we know it was deliberate. Perhaps it was a symbol of blood, of birth, of life itself. Perhaps it was meant to protect, or to honor, or simply to beautify one final time. Whatever the reason, it speaks of care. And care in death is a form of love. Others, too, are buried near her. Infants sometimes, their tiny bones barely held together, men and elders. The grave becomes a gathering, not of death, but of belonging. And in some sites, women lie not beneath the ground, but within it, in caves where their bodies were placed deep in the dark, in chambers hidden far from light. These spaces are not tombs in the modern sense. They feel more like wombs of the earth cool, still waiting. It is in these places that we see not just her body, but her spirit. Not as a ghost, not as a thing of fear, but as something that lingers through touch, through the items left behind, through the memories etched into the hands that placed her there. Her spirit is not separate from her bones. It is not trapped. It is not fleeing. It is resting, like the soil, like the trees, like the fire when the last ember goes out. And what of those who remained? They sat near the grave, perhaps for a while. They sang, perhaps, not in mourning, but in rhythm, in remembrance. They returned in time to the tasks of living, not because they forgot, but because life continues. And even in her absence, she remained, in the baskets still used, in the stories still told, in the children still growing. She did not vanish. She transformed. There are places where her bones have been found with tools in both hands. Others where she is buried with children nestled at her side. In one case, a woman was laid down with a carved antler, marked with patterns no one fully understands. The lines are deliberate, symmetrical, repeated. Some say it is a calendar. Others, a counting of cycles. But perhaps it is something simpler. A memory, etched by her own hand, carried with her into stillness. A signature not of name, but of self. The graves speak not just of death, but of how the living understood the sacred. And in many of these, women are not buried with less. They are buried with more pigment, more decoration, more tokens. This does not imply status in a hierarchical sense, but it implies meaning. The body that bore children, that carried baskets, that stirred the fire, that healed with herbs, that told the stories, that painted the walls, that danced in the dark, that bled without dying, that loved without name, that gave without expectation. Her death was not the loss of a function. It was the return of a spirit to the place from which it came. And that return was marked not with stone, but with silence, with color, with closeness. We do not have their prayers. We do not have their words for grief, but we have their gestures. And in those gestures, we see something that speaks across every chasm of time, that to live is to be remembered not by titles or wealth, but by care. That to die is not to vanish, but to be gathered back into the story that never truly ends. So tonight, as the fire in your own room dims to a quiet glow, and the hush of sleep begins to gather around your thoughts, let this story settle gently with you. The story of a woman long ago who lived without fame, who died without fanfare, but who was laid down with love. Her spirit, once held in a body, now rests in stone, in pigment, in the curve of the earth where her bones once lay. She is not forgotten. She was never forgotten. The earth remembers, and so do we. The moon has always risen with the same ancient grace, waxing and waning in quiet rhythm long before humans gave it names or stories. It floated above the sleeping forests of the Paleolithic world just as it does now, casting a pale glow over rivers and rocks, shimmering on the backs of animals and the brows of those who paused to look up. And among those early watchers were women who saw not only its light, but its mirror. For within their own bodies, something moved in time with that cold and watchful orb. Something subtle, something secret, and something deeply sacred. In the dim hush of prehistory, before gods had forms and laws had letters, there was the body of the woman, and there was the moon. And together, they shaped something older than myth, deeper than memory. A quiet reverence for the feminine that lived not in words, but in cycles. Long before the first temples rose from the soil, Long before thunder was given a name and sun a crown, people looked at the moon and saw more than a rock in the sky. They saw a rhythm that matched the bleeding of the womb, the swelling of the belly, the tides of birth and renewal. They saw in it a promise of return, a shape that thinned and vanished, yet always came back. And so the woman, whose body also bled and healed, emptied and filled, labored and recovered, was not a puzzle or a problem to be managed. She was a mystery to be honored. Her cycle was not inconvenience, it was cosmos. Her blood was not shame, it was time. And where time is sacred, so too is the one who carries it. She did not call herself a matriarch. No badge proclaimed her power. But in many early bands of human life, she was the keeper of knowledge, not because she demanded it, but because she remembered. She remembered the places where herbs grew. She remembered the signs that rain was coming. She remembered the birth cries of every child in the group, and the quiet after their first breath. She knew when the moon would darken, and when it would bloom again. Her authority was not forced. It flowed. It was not loud. It was trusted. The sacred feminine in prehistory was not a title or a religion. It was a presence. It moved through her body and the bodies of those who came before her, not with pride or power, but with meaning. Her monthly bleeding was not hidden. It was understood. In some groups, she may have stepped away for a few days, not in exile, but in rest, in reverence. The red tent is a later idea, but the concept of space, of sacred pause, likely lived in many forms. And perhaps, on those nights, she sat alone under the trees, her body easing into its release, her thoughts softer, quieter, wrapped in the pulse of her own inward tide. In caves across Europe and Asia, small figurines have been found carved of stone, shaped in clay, molded in bone. They are not uniform. Some are heavy and full-hipped, with breasts round and wombs exaggerated. Others are lean, elongated, their faces absent, but their curves unmistakable. We do not know what these figures meant. Some call them goddesses. Others, fertility charms. Perhaps they were neither. Perhaps they were reminders, not of divinity, but of power, of continuity, of the way life moves through form. To carve a woman's body into stone is to say, this matters. And to carry that stone from place to place is to say, let us not forget. The moon, meanwhile, rose again. It always did. And the bleeding stopped, and the belly grew, and the breasts swelled with milk, and the child came, and the circle turned once more. Her power was not in force. It was in rhythm. And in rhythm, there is something that cannot be broken. She knew things. Not in the way of books or scrolls, but in the way of water, knowing where to go. She knew that when the moon was thin, certain roots were bitter. That when the moon was full, dreams came longer. She knew that the body held memories not only of life, but of death. That a woman who had lost a child still carried something that needed tending. That hands held to the belly in silence could soothe more than medicine. And when others forgot, she remembered. That was her power. That was her offering. We do not know the names of these women. Their voices were never written down. But their presence lives in echoes, in the rituals that came later, in the temples built on hills, where once they may have given birth, in the stories of moon goddesses and earth mothers, in the carvings of spirals and circles and seeds. These are not decorations. They are symbols of recurrence, of return, of a power that is not about control, but about holding. In matrilineal cultures, still found in small pockets even today, lineage moves through the mother, the name, the home, the story. It is not a reversal of patriarchy. It is a remembering of what came before it. When the mother is the center, not by command but by gravity, things gather differently, not in hierarchy, but in orbit. And perhaps, in prehistory, this was more common than we once believed. Before agriculture narrowed roles. Before religion formalized hierarchy. before male gods replaced goddesses as primary. There may have been a time soft, slow, unrecorded, when the feminine was not above or below, but essential. Not worshipped in the sense of statues and sacrifice, but honored in the way the moon is honored. Quietly, regularly, as part of the sky. The matriarch was not just a mother. She was memory. When others forgot the old paths, she remembered them. When others rushed, she slowed. When others fought, she mended. Her strength was not in battle, but in bond. Not in fire, but in the warmth that gathers around it. She was not always right, but she was always returned to. And now, as the modern world races onward, so much of her is overlooked. The moon becomes a light in the sky, not a clock. The cycle becomes a nuisance, not a rhythm. But if you listen closely, if you stand very still on a quiet night, you can still feel it. That ancient thread, that old, old song. It hums in the bones of every woman who has bled, in the dreams of those who have tended others, in the hush of every child cradled against a heartbeat. The sacred feminine in prehistory was not an invention. It was a recognition that in the body of the woman, the world repeats itself. That in her hips, life is carried. That in her gaze, safety is made. That in her silence, stories wait. She is not gone. She is only sleeping, in the rhythm of tides, in the whisper of trees, in the slow turning of the moon, ever above, ever returning. And as you rest now, your breath slowing to meet the soft rhythm of night, perhaps you too feel it, that quiet pulse beneath your thoughts. That ancient thread, soft and strong, winding back through time to the first fires, to the first hands held in labor, to the first eyes lifted to the moon in wonder. She is there, still watching, still rising. There are forests so old that their roots remember things long after human memory has faded, places where the light filters down through a canopy woven thick with time, where the ground underfoot is soft with centuries of fallen leaves, and the air hums with a kind of quiet knowledge. In such places, where the scent of damp bark and moss hangs low like a veil, she once walked, not as a visitor, not as an intruder, but as one who belonged. Her feet bare, her basket light, her eyes scanning not just what was seen, but what was felt. This was not a hunt, not a harvest. It was something subtler. She was looking for what healed, for what whispered beneath bark and blossom, for what soothed the fever, stopped the bleeding, slowed the sorrow. She was the keeper of medicine, the woman who remembered. Before there were scrolls or books, before clinics and cures had names, before the body was a machine divided into parts, there was the healer. And in the heart of the earliest human communities, that healer was often a woman. Not by decree, but by rhythm, by nearness, by the way she watched the world and listened for what grew beneath the noise of daily life. She did not study anatomy. She observed pain. She did not prescribe. She prepared. She did not explain. She offered. Her knowledge was not catalogued in ink, but carried in muscle and breath and the deep folds of her attention. She knew where the good roots grew, the ones that numbed toothaches or eased childbirth. She knew which mushrooms softened vision, which ones killed, which ones sparked strange dreams that lingered like fog long after waking. She did not guess. She learned, slowly, from elders, from error, from the language of the forest itself. She watched what the deer avoided. She studied the patterns of decay. She tasted cautiously with the tip of her tongue. She crushed leaves and inhaled their scent. She sat beside the sick not to comfort, but to understand. When fevers raged, she cooled foreheads with cloth soaked in river mint. When grief hollowed the chest, she burned dried herbs and spoke in slow, spiraling tones that lulled the mind into rest. The others came to her not with reverence, but with trust. She was not a sorceress. She was not feared. But when breath shortened, when wounds would not close, when a child would not sleep, they came. They came because she had come through before, because someone had walked away with less pain than they arrived with, because she remembered what others forgot in panic. She remembered which bark dulled hunger, which smoke calmed fits, which poultice drew out the dark. There are traces of her work in the teeth of the dead, in the grooves where bitter herbs wore down enamel, in the staining of bone from mineral-rich leaves, in the burial sites where plant remains mingle with human remains, not as accident, but as offering. In some graves, flowers. In others, seeds. Not decorative, but deliberate. Medicine was not just for the living. It was part of the passage, part of the letting go, and she knew that too. That death required tending just as birth did. That the final breath, like the first, should be met not with panic, but with care. She had sat beside the dying and given them something to ease the edge, something that blurred the sharp corners of leaving. She did not promise more time. She promised peace. And she delivered. The mushrooms were part of it. Those strange, silent organisms that lived not in the light, but in the damp dark beneath logs, along roots, in the quietest corners of the forest. Some she used as food, others as medicine. Still others for something else, entirely something not spoken of often, but known. The ones that opened the mind, that unraveled the threads of thought and re-wove them into visions, not for fun, not for escape, but for clarity, for mourning, for ritual. She would prepare them carefully, often alone, often at night, grinding them into paste, mixing with water or fat, whispering not spells, but memories. These were moments of depth, not spectacle. The mind softened, the self widened, and in that space, sometimes the world made more sense. Was she a shaman? In later terms, perhaps, but she had no title. She had no doctrine. She simply knew how to cross thresholds, not with ceremony, but with calm. She crossed from health into healing, from confusion into clarity, from body into breath. And the others followed, not because she demanded, but because she knew where the path grew narrow and how to pass. Her memory was more than recall. It was practice. It was presence. She remembered which mixture soothed a crying child. But she also remembered the child's mother, long gone, who had once needed the same. She remembered faces, wounds, seasons. The time when food was scarce. The time the stream turned bitter. The time the moon did not rise for 3 nights. She remembered not with sentiment, but with usefulness. She was the thread that held the group's past together, not in stories around the fire, but in action, in the turning of leaves, in the timing of collection. Even when her own body aged, when her knees stiffened, when her eyes dimmed, she remained the one they turned to. Because by then, she carried not just knowledge, but history. She became a living map, a library of experience. And when her own final sickness came, she knew it. She prepared. She passed her tools, her bundle of dried herbs, her stone grinder, her pouch of seeds, to the one who had watched her most closely. A niece, a daughter, perhaps someone unrelated by blood, but bound by repetition. And that woman would carry forward what she could, and she would change it too, as the forest changed, as the body changed, as life demanded. The memory keeper was not a prophet. She did not predict, but she noticed. And noticing is a form of magic. She noticed when the air shifted, when the baby's cry changed pitch, when the man's wound smelled sweeter, a sign of rot, when the tree bloomed too early. These were not miracles. They were observations born of closeness, of time spent not controlling the world, but listening to it. And when modern hands now dig up fragments of these old camps, they find traces, bundles of dried herbs, tools worn thin from grinding, bowls stained with residue. And they ask, what was this for? Who made this? And sometimes the answer is, she did, the one who remembered, the one who healed, Not with fame, not with power, but with presence. She walked quietly, but where she walked, pain eased. She spoke gently, but when she spoke, breath steadied. She left little behind, no monument, no altar. But those she tended, they remembered. And now, as you breathe slowly into your own rest, imagine her just for a moment, not as a figure of mystery, but as a woman beside a fire, grinding herbs, humming something low and familiar. Imagine her touch, light and cool on a fevered brow. Imagine her voice, soft and sure, saying, "This will help." And maybe it did. Maybe it always did. And maybe that too is a kind of medicine. The knowing, the remembering, the care. The fire was never only for warmth. It cracked and hissed in the hush of the Paleolithic night. Yes, casting flickering shadows that curled like slow smoke across cave walls and worn skins. But beneath its flame lived something older than flame itself, something shared between breath and silence, something that hummed gently in the space between generations. And it often began with her. Not always the oldest, not always the mother, but always the one who had been listening the longest. She sat with her knees drawn near, the soft weight of a child curled beside her, another drifting just beyond sleep, and her voice low, unhurried, close to the crackle of the embers, spoke not to entertain, but to carry, not to impress, but to remember. She spoke myths not from parchment or carved stone, but from memory braided so tightly into her that even her pauses held meaning. These were not fairy tales. They were not performances. They were bridges across time. She did not invent them, not in the way we understand invention. She had heard them from the one who came before, and they had heard from theirs. And now she passed the flame, not from torch to torch, but from voice to ear, quietly, carefully, repeating not just the words, but the rhythm, the tone, the breath. Myths in her hands were living things, warm and fragile and wild, shaped not by rules, but by need, stretched and softened across the fabric of the years, like hide pulled taut, dyed with memory. Her words were not always full of heroes. There were no clear villains, no sharp lessons meant to bind behavior. Her stories were not tidy. They wandered, just like she had, through forests and over rivers, pausing beside the same fire again and again. There were animals that spoke with deep voices, spirits that wore the wind like clothing, women who turned into rivers, stars that remembered names, stones that wept when no one was watching. She told of the first mother, who bent down to press her lips to the earth and whispered the names of every tree before they grew. She told of the girl who followed the moon into the hills and came back with silver dust in her hair and a song no one could forget. She spoke of the mountain that cracked open when someone spoke the truth aloud, and how inside was not fire, but the sound of laughter. These myths had no singular meaning. Their power lay in being remembered, retold, reshaped each time by voice and moment and mood. When a child was afraid, the stories softened. When the group was grieving, they deepened. When the rains were late, the tailies turned toward hope. They adjusted, like her hands on a newborn's back, firm but fluid, rooted but reaching. And these stories, these long, slow threads of memory, were not just hers to keep. The children listened not as audience, but as apprentices. They remembered too, sometimes repeating lines under their breath, sometimes correcting her if she changed a detail. This was not criticism, it was care. The story was not only hers, it was the group's, and when she was gone, another voice would carry it forward. Perhaps not in the same shape, perhaps with different names or endings, but it would live on, as it always had, not because someone wrote it down, but because someone whispered it to someone who listened. These myths were not idle. They were how people knew who they were. Before identity had paper and seals, before memory could be stored outside the body, people remembered through myth. They remembered how the river got its bend, why certain stones were never moved, why one cave was to be entered only during the full moon. They remembered who had come before, not in bloodlines or lists, but in stories. The man who could speak to birds, the woman who dreamt of fire and found it, the child who did not cry during the storm. Were these true? Truth was not the point. The point was pattern, connection, a sense that something larger moved beneath the daily tasks, that the world was not just food and danger and cold, but meaning, folded softly into shape. She held these stories the way one holds something delicate, but used often a carved bowl, a fur patched many times. They were not pristine. They were handled, trusted. She knew how to tell them, so they settled into the space between people like warmth. She knew when to pause, when to lower her voice, when to let the fire speak instead. She did not explain what the story meant. Meaning arrived on its own, slowly, like mist through the trees. And long after her voice fell silent, those who had listened would find themselves retelling her words. Perhaps not perfectly, but truth does not always live in precision. Sometimes it lives in breath, in the way a voice catches at the memory of an ending, in the way a younger one sits up straighter, suddenly certain of the next part. The myth lives on, not because it is exact, but because it is loved. Archaeologists will never find these stories. There are no letters carved into the earth, no scrolls tucked in clay jars, but they may find symbols, patterns scratched into stone, spirals, lines, hands. They may find the remains of the fire circle, ash layered with charcoal, a bone flute nearby. They may wonder what was said here, who sat where, what names were spoken. They may imagine songs. They may guess at rituals. But the story itself, the breath that carried it, has long since dissolved into air. Unless, of course, it never left. Unless it lives on, not in its original words, but in the shape of our questions, in the echo of our longing to understand. Because storytelling never disappeared. It only changed form. The myths she once spoke by firelight now travel through pages, through screens, through whispered lullabies. They wear new clothing, but they move the same. They curl inside us like warmth. They reach across distance like hands. And sometimes, when we lie in bed at night and remember something someone told us long ago, a tale, a phrase, a quiet thought that refuses to leave, we are taking part in that same lineage. We are listening again. We are remembering. She may have died long before memory became history. Her name may never have been spoken outside her circle, but the myths she carried were never really hers. They were the forests, the fires, the winds, and perhaps that is why they still reach us, because they were never closed. They were never finished. They were meant to continue, to adapt, to live in whoever took them in. So tonight, as you rest, as your own breath slows, and the hum of the day grows softer, imagine her voice, not in your language, not even in words you recognize, but in tone, in rhythm, in the shape of a story, slowly unfolding like a hand opening in the dark. Feel how it drifts, not in a straight line, but in spirals. Feel how it knows exactly when to pause. Feel how it holds you even now, and know that this too is a myth, not made up, but made alive. A story that began in someone's breath long ago and now finds you, finds your stillness, finds your sleep. She never left. Her story only changed shape, and tonight it is yours to keep. There is a peculiar thing that happens when memory becomes imagination, and imagination is left unchallenged. It hardens into stereotype, into a mask so worn that we forget it ever had a face underneath. And so it was in the long centuries after her voice fell silent that the woman of prehistory, who once crouched beside fire and carried knowledge in her hands, was slowly reshaped not by those who knew her, but by those who guessed at her from a distance. She was drawn with wide eyes and tangled hair draped in furs, cut for spectacle, her expressions frozen somewhere between confusion and desire. Her place in the story reduced to background noise behind clubs and roars and the swagger of men who dragged their knuckles and claimed the world as theirs. She was rewritten, not with malice, perhaps, but with neglect. And that, too, is a kind of forgetting. The cave woman, as pop culture imagined her, became less a person and more a costume something slipped on for humor or titillation, an accessory to a history that had, by then, forgotten how to listen to what the bones and the fire and the earth had once whispered so clearly. She was never a caricature. She was real. When film began to flicker its first shaky frames across silver screens, it brought with it images that clung to the mind with strange tenacity. In these early depictions, the cave woman was rarely central. She appeared as a visual shorthand for wildness, for innocence wrapped in allure, or danger softened by skin. Her clothes were torn just enough, her eyes wide but blank. She was often mute, not because she could not speak, but because the story had not given her anything worth saying. When she ran, it was not toward food or fire or shelter, but into the arms of someone else's plotline. When she fought, it was with claws, not tools. When she cried, it was rarely for herself. This version of her, projected again and again, etched into cartoons and comedies and Halloween costumes, was not meant to honor or question. It was meant to amuse. And amusement, while not cruel in itself, often becomes a soft shadow under which truth is quietly erased. Yet there is a strange echo inside this fiction, as if even those who reshaped her could not quite erase her strength. There were flickers, now and then, of resistance cavewomen who led, who wielded weapons, who rolled their eyes at the men they traveled with. These were rare, often mocked, but present. They hinted at something remembered but not understood, that the women of the distant past were not helpless, not voiceless, not waiting to be civilized. They were already whole, already human, already holding together the fragile edge of survival through knowledge and care and presence. What pop culture missed in its attempts to simplify her was the complexity that lay beneath every quiet gesture of the woman who once lit fires before dawn and remembered how to pull sweetness from bark. And yet, we cannot blame stories for being stories. The trouble lies not in the telling, but in the assuming. When a myth is repeated often enough, it replaces memory. The cave woman became a figure of parody, and in doing so, her truths faded into cliché. But under the surface of every joke, something lingers. We laughed at her, but we also kept her. She stayed in our minds. She remained, even distorted. Which means something in us knew she mattered, even if we no longer knew why. But time, like the river she once drank from, eventually bends. And with new hands came new tools not for survival, but for understanding. Science began to ask gentler questions. Anthropology quieted its assumptions. Archaeology stepped closer, with less noise and more listening. And in the strata of ancient soil, in the lines of bone, in the wear of teeth, and the width of hips, and the placement of tools, something began to shift. The story started to return not fully, not clearly, but more honestly. We saw that she had crafted, that she had led, that she had hunted, that she had painted, that she had raised the next generations, not just with warmth, but with wisdom. The cartoon softened, the joke dimmed, and in the glow of rediscovery, the real woman began to step out from the cave once more. Now, in museum corners and soft documentaries and whispered discussions across classrooms, she is being redrawn. Not as a symbol, not as a goddess, not even as a heroine, but as someone real, someone complicated, someone who laughed and labored and loved and aged, someone whose role cannot be captured in fur and a single line of dialogue, someone who deserves to be remembered not for how she looked in a costume, but for what she carried in her days. The cave woman of pop culture was imagined in jest, but the woman beneath that jest, the one who walked with steady feet, who bled in silence and survived winters and held fire in her palms, was never imagined. She was lived. Her life did not fit neatly into the frames of the stories we later told, because it was wider, quieter, more grounded in the dust and breath of reality. And that is where we can begin to find her, again, not in caricature, but in care. So tonight, as your eyes grow heavier and the flickering shapes of thought grow soft around the edges, you might imagine her, not the version shaped for laughs or lenses, but the one who sat in the shelter's mouth, watching the trees move in the dusk, her fingers wrapped around a bowl she carved herself. Her clothes not made for exposure, but for endurance. Her hair not wild, but woven. Her silence not blank, but deep. She breathes just as you breathe. She watches the fire. She blinks slowly. And in that moment, misunderstood no longer, she returns not as myth, not as mask, but as woman. And that, perhaps, is enough. The threads have never truly broken. They may have thinned, stretched across centuries, like soft sinew dried by sun and distance, but they've never snapped. They run beneath every moment of human life, too quiet to notice unless you are still, unless you are listening. And when you do listen, when the noise fades, when you sit with your hands resting in your lap, eyes half closed, breath shallow as the last glow of dusk, there it is, that soft tether from now to then. From the woman who grinds grain in a kitchen lit by flickering bulbs, back to the one who ground wild roots against a slab of stone, each motion echoing the other in a rhythm that needs no clock. The thread lives in the way we reach without looking, in how we soothe a crying child in the dark, not by logic, but by instinct, in how we shape things with our fingers before we've learned the names of those shapes, in how we remember not just in story, but in body. The same hands that once scraped hides, that twisted fibers, that lifted children from blood and warmth into breath and sound, now button shirts, now cradle books, now press softly against glass when saying goodbye. The world has changed, but the hands remain. They do not look the same, perhaps. Rings circle fingers now. Polish gleams. Phones rest lightly in palms that once held flint. But deep in the bones of them, in the fine interplay of tendon and memory, the shape of the old world still lingers. Because hands learn things across time, they don't forget. The hands that kneaded dough by firelight are not so different from those that knead bread on kitchen counters today. The hands that once wiped dirt from a child's brow now wipe away tears with tissues, but the gesture is unchanged. The comfort it gives, unchanged. Even the nervous habits, a wringing, a clenching, the smoothing of cloth carry the same quiet tension, the same desire to manage the unmanageable. And this thread, this continuation that slips so easily through history, is strongest where care resides. In the small, invisible labors that never made it into records, but make up the fabric of every life that has ever been lived. There's a reason we call it the fabric of life, because someone wove it. Someone still weaves it. The act of care, of sustaining, of tending, these are not modern inventions. They are ancient. Older than agriculture. Older than writing. Older than architecture. They came before even the idea of structure, because the body needed warmth before it needed shelter. The child needed food before it needed fire. And someone stepped forward to provide. She was not called a provider. That term came later, boxed in by roles. She did not wear a badge or a uniform, but her role was clear. Her hands moved first in the morning and last at night. She was not thanked with applause. She did not expect it. Her reward was presence of the people around her breathing, continuing, surviving. The world now may seem louder, faster, filled with complexity and invention and urgency. But those same gestures survive in the quiet moments. The mother who lays out clothes the night before. The nurse who tucks the blanket higher when no one is watching. The elder who teaches the younger to peel fruit without wasting the skin. These are echoes, not of nostalgia, but of truth. And it is not only in care that the thread survives. It moves through creation too. The woman who paints in a studio under morning light carries something of the one who painted in ochre deep inside the earth. The pigments are different, the canvas new, but the hand, the movement, the impulse that need to mark the world with something made from within, it is the same. The sculptor's hands in the present day, shaping wet clay on a wheel, spin in the same spiral motion as the woman who pressed lines into soft soil beside the shelter as fire. Not copying, but remembering. Not in thought, but in motion. Even language carries this thread. The way lullabies fall into the same cadences across cultures. The way rhythm so often mimics heartbeat. The way mothers everywhere develop a soft, secret voice for speaking to babies, even when they think they've invented it themselves. These are not modern ideas. They are ancient inheritances, carried not through books, but through voice, through contact, through the quiet transference of comfort. She may not have known she was singing, but she hummed, and the hum soothed. And that hum became a melody, became a rhythm, became part of how we remember love. And there are darker threads too. Not all lines are woven with peace. The weight of labor, the exhaustion of constancy, the expectation of giving without rest, these too are old. There were days when she rose with pain in her bones and still gathered water. Nights when the child would not stop crying as she sat awake with eyes dry and hollow. The weariness in the mother's eyes at the end of a long shift. This too is a thread she shares with the woman who once sat beside a fire chewing bitter leaves to keep her mind sharp while others slept. The sacrifice did not begin with industry. It did not begin with cities. It began with the decision to stay, to give, to continue. And though now we have language for it, burnout, compassion fatigue, invisible labor, it has always existed, always been carried, mostly in silence. But through it all, the thread never tears. It frays, sometimes it thins, but it holds. In kitchens, in hospital rooms, in bedrooms where toddlers breathe in rhythms only a parent can decode, in classrooms, in gardens, in studios, in boardrooms even, though the shape of the care may be more hidden there. It moves from hand to hand, from task to task, from day to day. And in every place it passes, it ties us back to her, the woman in the cave, the one who knew where the roots grew, the one who held the stories in her breath, and the herbs in her pouch, and the child in her lap. She is not ancient in the way we mean it. She is current, present, part of us. And this knowing, this thread of recognition, is not something to mourn. It is something to rest into, to let your body remember that you are not alone, that what you do, the small acts, the unnoticed moments, the gestures of care and creation and continuation, they come from somewhere. They are not new. And because of that, they are strong. Stronger than they seem. They have lasted this long. So as your breath slows now, as your body softens into sleep, perhaps your hands rest beside you. Perhaps they curl slightly, the way they have been shaped to do. Perhaps they still hold the rhythm of tasks undone, or dreams half-shaped. But know this, they are not just your hands. They are hers too, and hers, and hers. A line of women reaching back through shadow and soil and silence, all the way to the first fire. And you carry them forward, without needing to try, without needing to know, only needing to rest, and let the thread remain. There are things inside you that you do not know by name, and yet they are there tucked beneath thought, folded deep within breath, nestled behind the hush between heartbeats. You carry a legacy so old, it does not speak in words, but in impulses, in gestures, in quiet knowing. It lives in the curve of your fingers, in the timbre of your voice, in the strange comfort you feel in certain sounds, certain places, certain smells you've never known, and yet somehow remember. These are the echoes of the first women, passed on not in scrolls or stories alone, but through the silent, precise transmission of DNA and the slow dance of language forming over generations. When the last ember dies in the hearth and your room is still, your body does not forget where it came from. Somewhere, encoded in the spiral staircase of your cells, the ancient ones rest women, whose names we do not know, but whose lives continue in yours. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, but truly, in blood and code and chemical memory. You may never have seen her, the woman who pressed her palm against the wall of a cave and blew ochre around it to leave a ghost of herself behind. But perhaps your hand, if held up to hers, would match in width and length in some forgotten fingerprint of shared structure. You may never have hunted or gathered, never woven with nettle fiber or chewed the root of a bitter herb to ease birth pains, but your body, in quiet ways, remembers. Certain genes flicker to life and then dim again like distant stars, lighting briefly in moments of intuition or instinct. Some parts lie dormant but intact, carried through the centuries like heirlooms of a home that no longer exists. The way your immune system flinches, the way your circadian rhythms move with the light, the way your brain maps the world through sound and scent before thought, these are not new designs. They are ancestral patterns. You are, in every breath, a chorus of those who came before. And language, oh, how language holds them too. Not only in the stories passed down from mother to child in a dozen dialects and tongues, but in the shape of the stories themselves. The rhythm, the song, the repetition. Long before letters were carved or painted, words were held in breath, in lullabies whispered to crying infants under animal skin roofs, in the naming of plants and seasons and stars, in the hushed warnings and the shared laughter. And even now, even surrounded by books and glowing screens, some part of you still responds to that tone, a cadence of comfort, the circularity of tales told to soothe, to remember, to preserve. A mother rocking a child to sleep today speaks in a voice whose pattern has barely changed in 50,000 years, soothing through sound, teaching through tone, carrying memory not only in meaning, but in music. And beneath the known languages, there are the ones that no longer have words. The languages lost to time, to silence, to erasure, but not lost entirely. For language is not only spoken, it is lived. It's in how hands move when we speak. It's in the tilt of the head, the narrowing of the eyes, the pause before the answer. It's in the shared gestures we all seem to know, even if no one ever taught them. Language doesn't disappear. It dissolves into us. It becomes movement. It becomes emotion. It becomes rhythm in poetry, pattern in thought, symmetry in metaphor. Somewhere in you is a wordless song your ancestors knew by heart. And the DNA carries things language cannot. It carries the curve of your spine, the resilience in your bones, the pace of your heartbeat under stress, the subtle inheritance of strength, of endurance, of healing. It carries the way your tears fall, the way your skin mends. It remembers how to survive. And more than that, it remembers how to live, to seek comfort, to love, to hold. You are the continuation of experiments long tested in wild places. The woman who survived the famine passed on more than genes. She passed on caution and cleverness. The one who resisted illness gave you not only antibodies, but patterns of resistance folded tightly into your cells. And those who lived gently, who cradled others in their arms, who whispered songs in darkness, they passed on something too. A way of moving through the world that does not disappear when they do. Somewhere along the way, science learned to name these patterns. Mitochondrial DNA, they called it the mother's line. It does not mix. It passes down whole, from mother to child, again and again, unchanged, but for the slow erosion of time. A direct connection, unbroken, like a glowing thread pulled through each generation. When you touch her hand to your chest, you are touching her too, the first woman whose mitochondrial code lives in you. She walked in silence long before your tongue formed syllables. She breathed under stars whose light has already died. She was real. She is real. And she is in you. You are not an echo of her. You are her, reshaped. You are her future, made present. Your laugh may not sound like hers, but it carries the same impulse to express, to connect, to release. And so, you carry two languages, one of sound and word and gesture, one of cell and code and memory. Both are ancient, both endure, and neither requires your attention to keep moving. They persist even as you sleep, even as you forget. Even now, as your eyes grow heavy, as your breath grows soft. The legacy does not need your effort. It needs only your being. You do not need to prove yourself worthy of inheritance. You already are. You were born carrying the song. And if this legacy seems quiet, it is because it was never meant to be shouted. It was meant to be lived. In how you hold someone, in how you rest, in how you listen, in how you speak softly in the dark, in how you know when someone needs comfort, even when they do not say it. These things are not taught in books. They are taught in bodies, in touch, in presence, in the hush that comes before sleep. So tonight, as you lie there, perhaps with hands resting on your belly or chest, feel the softness of your breath. Know that within you are 10,000 years of knowing, of surviving, of creating, of healing. That your tongue remembers more languages than you will ever speak. That your blood holds patterns older than the pyramids. That your body knows stories even you do not know how to tell. And that none of it needs to be remembered tonight. Only felt, only trusted, only allowed to be, because the thread remains, because the music continues, because you are both the story and the storyteller, and because even in silence, she speaks through you. The last fire did not roar. It did not protest the winds of change or plead for permanence. It simply flickered, swayed, and surrendered, its light dancing for a final time on stone walls that had listened for thousands of nights. There was no sudden ending, no singular moment in which the Paleolithic era turned and vanished. It faded like breath on cold air, imperceptibly, softly, with the hush of footsteps on packed earth and the slow unraveling of what had once been everything. The woman, whoever she was in those final days of the old ways, likely did not know that her world was ending. She rose before dawn as always, stirred the embers, coaxed life from ash. She gathered herbs, offered warmth to a child, twisted fiber between her fingers as she watched the light climb the ridges beyond her shelter. To her, it was simply another day, but history was shifting under her feet, like roots loosening their hold on the soil. And as you rest now, allow yourself to drift into her shadow, to follow the quiet path she once walked when the world was not yet bound in fences or pages or maps. This woman did not leave a monument behind, no name carved in stone, no date etched in metal. What she left was deeper, a warmth that lingered in the places she touched, a groove in the stone from years of grinding, a worn path between stream and shelter, the shape of a child's hand wrapped around her finger. And in this way, her world was not erased. It was absorbed, transformed, and carried forward, not in thunder, but in thread. The ending of the Paleolithic was not a vanishing, but a folding. The long age of wandering and firelight curled into itself, gently, like a child into sleep. Agriculture came not as a conqueror, but as a whisper, a new rhythm quietly overlaying the old. Slowly, the hand that once scattered seeds in wild meadows began to place them in soil with intention. The shelter grew thicker walls. The fire moved inside. And with these changes came stories more fixed, more linear, more certain. But something was always left behind, a part of the soul that remembered when the world was unbounded, when the night sky was a ceiling, and the body knew the land like it knew its own breath. She, the cave woman, the gatherer, the healer, the mother, was not left behind. She traveled forward in different forms. Her work became ritual. Her voice became myth. Her tools became lineage. And even in the age of grain and iron and written law, there was always a part of us that turned back to the fire. Not for nostalgia, but for grounding, for the rhythm that life once held. The pulse of days shaped by the sun's angle, not the clock's hands. The simple sacredness of staying alive together in the face of uncertainty. Imagine her now, if you wish, the last of her kind, not extinct, but shifting. Perhaps she stood at the edge of a field someone else had cleared. She watched as others laid the first rows of a new life, neat and purposeful. And she turned one last time toward the forest, toward the cave, toward the wildness that had raised her. Her eyes did not mourn. They held the calm of knowing that nothing truly ends, it only changes shape. And then she stepped forward into the world to come. You may never know her name. You may never walk her path or feel the weight of the pack she once carried. But still her story is inside you. Her breath is folded into your lungs. Her fire flickers in the soft places of your mind, the places that long for simplicity, for warmth, for something older than time. And when you close your eyes tonight, the distance between your world and hers grows small. Not through memory, but through presence. Because the past, in its most honest form, is not something behind us. It is something within us. And so we say goodbye not with sorrow, but with stillness. Not with a closed door, but with an open hand. The Paleolithic was not a primitive time, but a profound one. A time when life itself was the only teacher, and each day was shaped not by ambition, but by need, by love, by rhythm. It is easy to forget, in a world of wires and speed, that once the human spirit found meaning in the sound of rain, in the dance of fire, in the taste of fresh berries, and the laughter of children who had never seen a wheel or a roof or a written word. But if you slow down enough, if you let the noise fall away, you may hear her still. You may feel her in the gentle way your body yields to rest, in the flicker of dreams where no language yet exists. Let this final fire burn low in your thoughts. Let it warm you, not with heat, but with memory. Let it carry you back to a time when the night was long but safe, when stories were not written but whispered, and when to exist was itself an act of beauty. You are the child of 1,000 fires. You are the echo of 100 hands shaping stone, weaving fiber, brushing hair from a child's brow. You are the future she could not name, but trusted would come. And now, as the flames die down in this quiet story, as your breath evens and your limbs grow heavy, rest in that knowing, the knowing that nothing is ever truly lost, only carried, and tonight carried by you. The story slows now, the final threads unwinding into silence, as if the echoes of a fire long faded still leave warmth against the skin of thought. You have journeyed far tonight, not in distance, but in depth. Through shadowed shelters and gathering fields, beside quiet earths and silent burials, through pigments, smeared by ancient hands and laughter that never made it to paper. You've walked with those who walked before words, before maps, before memory had a name. And yet, they are not far from you, not really. Their world, the Paleolithic world, is buried not only in stone, but in you, in your gestures, in the breath you didn't notice just now, in the rhythm of your blinking, as your body begins to yield to the soft lull of sleep. This woman we followed, this unnamed figure who kept fires lit and futures safe, with no knowledge of how far her shadow would stretch, she remains, like mist that clings even after the sun has risen. And perhaps what she teaches is not meant to be understood, but simply remembered not in the mind, but in the marrow. That life can be enough. That warmth can be enough. That hands, holding one another gently in the cold, are a form of wisdom older than language. In the modern rush of what must be done, must be achieved, must be counted and proved and planned, we forget how to move slowly. But she did not. Her every act was deliberate, unhurried, a response to the slow pulse of the natural world. She did not ask what she could become. She asked only what must be done today to keep others safe, to keep the coals alive until morning. And in doing so, she became the quiet architecture of everything we now call human. You feel it now, don't you? A slowing, not just of thought, but of time. As if her world is reminding yours that life is not measured by speed, but by presence. Her steps are not your steps, but you share the same dusk. The same body that craves rhythm, safety, and meaning. She knew nothing of nations or numbers, but she knew the sky's moods. She knew the sound of a child sleeping. She knew how to wait. And perhaps that is enough, even now. Perhaps especially now. It is easy, in the towering halls of history, to be dazzled by conquest and crowned names, by wars and walls and wonders carved in stone. But all of it, every marvel you've ever read of, rests atop the unmarked graves and unspoken labors of people like her quiet, persistent, unnamed women who shaped the future with hands that were never idle and eyes that watched the fire, not for spectacle, but for survival. Her memory does not rise in monuments, but in the fact that we are here at all. And tonight, as sleep begins to draw near, you might let your own life soften into that understanding. That history is not always loud. That the most lasting legacies are often held in silence, in the hush before dawn, in the echo of lullabies not written down, in the gesture of handing food to another before taking your own. She was never a myth, never a mystery, never a symbol. She was just living. And isn't that the most extraordinary thing? You might now picture her once more, not as the cave woman painted in guesswork, but as she was in motion, in labor, in laughter, in stillness. Maybe she is crouched near the fire, feeding it her breath. Maybe she is sitting beneath a tree, humming a song that has never had words. Maybe she is giving birth, silently, with the strength of a world in her spine. Or maybe she is watching the stars, the same stars that wheel overhead now, with a child in her lap and no fear in her heart. Because in her world, there was no need to be more than what she was. She was not behind. She was not less. She was not waiting to evolve. She was already enough. She still is. And as you lie here, wrapped in the softness of this moment, your body slowing its rhythm in time with hers, you might feel a part of that truth taking root in you. A return to something slower, simpler, quieter. A fire that does not need to blaze to be real. And this is where we part from her. Not in mourning, but in peace. Not because she is gone, but because she has given what she came to give. She does not need to be remembered loudly, only truly. With care, with gentleness. With an ear turned toward the past not to take, but to listen. She was the beginning not of a gender, or a role, or a story, but of presence. Of being here, now, fully. That is her gift. That is your inheritance. And now, let yourself rest, knowing that the line has never broken. That your breath, your heartbeat, your dreams, however far they reach, are tethered to hers. The last fire may have burned low, but it was never extinguished. It moved inward. It moved forward. It moved into you. And now the story is done. The sounds fade, the night settles, and the woman of stone and smoke and dawn, she returns to her quiet, and you to yours. Sleep well.